Hey everyone, I'm Jenna Beach. I am Eric Beach's wife. Eric is the co-founder of Project Echelon and the veteran spokesperson for In Country. And I'm coming here today to tell you guys a little bit about our story from my perspective. Eric and I met in 2009. He had already been out of the Army for about 4 years at that point. One of the first times we hung out was actually when I found out that he had PTSD. I was trying to be all like playful and cute and like playfully scare him. And he quickly told me like, hey, that's not a good idea. I have PTSD and yeah, please don't do that again. At that point, I didn't know anything about PTSD. Previously, like growing up, I didn't really know much about the military or veterans. It wasn't really anything that was at the forefront of my mind in life. And then Eric came into my life, and that all changed. Our relationship grew really quickly. We were engaged after 2.5 months, and about a year later, we got married. I would say every year of our marriage, I've learned at least a handful of new things about new triggers or why something was happening. And I'm very thankful that Eric was fairly open with me. So he shared some of his stories with me and helped me understand why he struggled the way he struggled. Like, for example, one time we were driving somewhere and he was driving, and I typically helped him navigate and tell him where to go. And I think we were going to a restaurant, and I didn't have the exact directions, and he all of a sudden got really panicky. And I was like, it's okay, like, we can pull over. And to me, it was completely fine. And I had no idea why he was so panicked, why something so simple to me would be something so intense in his mind. And later he shared with me that when he was in Iraq and you didn't have a plan or the things didn't go as planned, something bad typically happened. So he had that trigger in him that made him feel like something bad was going to happen, even though here in the United States, the likelihood of something bad happening, if you don't have a plan, is very, very minimal. And it helped me realize that this is something I'll never fully understand. And this is something that people who don't have it in their life, it's really difficult for them to understand, because triggers are so personal and to each person's life and their experiences. And you can't make a master list of what everyone's going to experience. It's so individual. About a year after we were married, we had our first daughter, and it was amazing. Eric was working a full-time job as a respiratory therapist at that time, and we just kind of went about life. I was finishing my bachelor's degree, and he went to work, and that was our day-to-day. However, after about Ella's first year of life, the triggers that were happening because of working full-time and struggling, and just the sleepless nights of having a baby who's crying and waking him up in the middle of the night in a panic, it was taking a toll on him. When Ella, our oldest, was a year old, Eric lost his job. I remember we were laying in bed in the morning, and his alarm was going off, and it went off multiple times, and I just rolled over and looked at him, and he did not look good. Like, I knew he was really struggling, where I didn't know if he was safe to go to work. So I just looked at him and I said, I think you should call in and tell them. I think you should take the day off, or a couple days, or whatever you need. Like, you need to take care of you right now. He called in, and essentially what happened was they won't let him come back to work without a doctor's note saying that he was capable of performing his job duties. And honestly, he wasn't capable of doing his job at that point. And he never went back. They didn't officially let him go because that would have been put on them. So we were in a place of, I was finishing my internship for my bachelor's degree, and he lost his job, and he was only 30% disabled through the VA at that point. So we had an income of $700 a month. And to support your family, even in a low cost of living area on $700 a month, is near impossible. Thankfully, we had a little bit of savings at that point, where I told him, like, this is okay. Like, we're not going to freak out. We're going to focus on you getting better because this is what we need to happen right now. This was our crisis in the moment. And that's what we did. I made some phone calls to the VA, and they got us connected with, or got Eric connected with a therapist locally because he had put off therapy for a long time. And we're very thankful that that ended up being a good fit. And he also was put into a polytrauma assessment where they were checking to see if he had a traumatic brain injury, which indeed he had a mild traumatic brain injury. Eric always laughs at that story of like when we found out, because we were walking out of the VA and I said to him something like, I'm so glad that you have a traumatic brain injury. And I wasn't glad that he had that. I was glad for answers. Having the answers just made things make sense. Like we had no idea he had a traumatic brain injury prior to that. But when I knew, it was like, oh my gosh, like the things we struggled with in like our first year or so of marriage were making sense. Like in our day-to-day, it was like, why can't you remember where to put the dishes away? Like, it's not that hard. The plates go here and the cups go here. Like, I don't get it. Like it didn't make any sense to me. Or a bigger thing, like he wasn't remembering conversations we had, like full conversations that were, to me, what I felt and he probably felt were important conversations. It wasn't that he wasn't listening or he just couldn't remember them. And when his PTSD symptoms were exacerbated, his memory was also very poor. So those answers brought some clarity, but it didn't take away the struggles we were having. Yeah, for the next few years, we continued to struggle. Eric started pursuing things he was interested in, like filmmaking, and that ended up taking us to Kentucky, where he pursued a degree in filmmaking. What could have been a great thing also exacerbated symptoms. Him being full-time in school, it was hard for him to follow a schedule and remember the schedule. It was very often that he messed up which day it was, or he didn't know what day it was, and so he would miss class or he'd go to the wrong class, which brought a lot of inner turmoil to him. Like he felt like he wasn't a man, and all of those things kind of compounded on each other, where he was trying to do extra things to prove that he was a man. He was volunteering and he was helping out other students with film projects. It burnt him out. It made things worse. It got to the point where he finally told me that he was suicidal. I remember that day, he had a therapy appointment, and he came back, and a little bit later we were sitting on the couch, and he said, I have something to tell you. And that moment of like, I have something to tell you, and then there's a pause and my heart starts racing, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like what does he have to tell me? Like, this sounds bad. And I was nervous. And then he told me that what he talked to this therapist about was that he was really struggling with suicidal ideation, that he was wanting to kill himself. And in that moment, I was overcome with emotion. Like, I couldn't believe what he just told me, because for all of our relationship at that point, that was 2015, so we had been together for 6 years at that point, and throughout our relationship, probably every couple months, if not more, I would check in with him and ask him, how are you doing? Where are you at? Where are you at mentally? Do you have thoughts of harming yourself? I heard his therapist ask him that over the years when I'd gone with him, and every single time he said no, and he assured me that he would never do that he was never that bad, never in that place. And so for him to then tell me that he wanted to kill himself, I I couldn't believe it. Like, my immediate thought was, what else aren't you telling me? I had no reason not to trust him until that point where I felt like my trust was shattered. Like, that's a big thing when your spouse doesn't want to be on this earth anymore. And these questions kind of went through my mind of like, but we have kids. And our life together seemed pretty strong and pretty great. Our marriage wasn't terrible. Like, I felt like our marriage was strong. Like, why would he want that? But at the same point, like, I knew that it wasn't about me and it wasn't about our kids. And he has lost friends while he was overseas, as well as ones who have taken their lives after they got back. And the place he was in at that point was so low that I was worried about him, but I never thought I'd hear those words from him, that he was planning to take his life. You know, while we were sitting on the couch, I remember turning to him and saying, I hear you. Can you promise me that you will not follow through? Like, can you promise me that you won't kill yourself? And I said, we'll get you help. I'll do whatever it takes to get you help. Like, will you do whatever it takes to heal? And he, in that moment, promised me that he would not take his life and that he would do whatever it took. So I took him saying that, and I was believing him. We had our second daughter by this point, and she was almost a year old. And when she was a baby, I cloth diapered, and there was a brand that I used that I loved, and they had a community chat page on Facebook that I was really connected in, and felt like I had support of women. And I knew there was women there who were in the military or veterans or like spouses. And so I reached out and shared what was happening in our life. And not really even knowing what I was looking for, but I needed a community for myself, for support, because that was very heavy. It was very heavy and a lot that I felt like I had to carry. I'm so thankful that I reached out, because one of the ladies in there reached out to me and she said, hey, my spouse and I, we have this nonprofit, and we help get veterans connected with programs that can help them, especially when they're in a position that Eric is in. And so I remember saying to Eric, hey, this person reached out to me. She offered for her spouse to talk to you on the phone. Are you willing to do that? And I was so nervous to ask him to do that, because I'm basically saying, will you talk to someone that I don't even know? I've talked to their spouse for the first time in my life in a Facebook group. Will you talk to them? And I don't even know why. Just do it. And he said yes. And he was nervous, but he said yes. And that was because he committed to me that he would do anything to heal. So he was honoring that promise to me. And so he talked on the phone, and they shared, like, there's this program called Save a Warrior that we're connected with, and it's a warrior-led program, and I really think that this can be something that could benefit you. So fill out the application. At that same time, I had also been calling the VA and talking to them about their inpatient program. And what that looked like was we would have had to wait at least 3 weeks after he had met with this therapist again, and I think someone else, to be deemed in a bad enough position to do inpatient. In that moment, I'm like, but I feel like my husband is in a really bad place. He's admitted that he wants to kill himself, even though he's committed that to me that he won't. Like, we're in a very vulnerable place, and I felt like we had to jump through hoops with the VA system. And like, I understand there's obviously policy that they have to go through that, but I didn't know what to do. Like, it didn't make sense to me in that moment where I felt like we were in a crisis. So we pursued the Save a Warrior option. And I don't even really remember the timeline, but I think it was less than a week. Eric and I were actually on a date, and he got a call during our date. It was on a Friday, I think. And it was one of the guys who was involved in Save a Warrior called him and said, like, hey, I need you to call me back, like, ASAP. This is very urgent. And Eric called him back, and they talked through some stuff to see if Eric was on board, if he would commit to healing, if he's all in, that he will do whatever it takes to heal. And they're like, okay, well, our program starts in 2 days. And we're like, okay, like, thank you. Like, this was crazy. And another crazy thing is the program was being held 15 minutes from our house. He went for 5 days, and that was the start of this chapter of his healing. Before that, we've had a couple other things in our journey that helped him in his healing, but in this moment of crisis, that was his help. He really committed himself to healing, and with that, as the spouse and being in a caregiver role and also taking care of kids, I felt like I was taking care of everything because I needed to support him. I needed my husband alive, and our kids needed their daddy. So I said, you focus on healing, do what you need to do, don't worry about the rest. And that's what we did for 4 or 5 months probably. And he spent a lot of time reading books. He spent time meditating. He still had a lot of really bad days where he was struggling. And I mean, it was kind of to be expected. I didn't expect him to go through a program and be instantly healed, because that's not how PTS works. It's a process, and it's a lifelong process. It's just giving the veterans tools to cope as they meet hurdles in their journey. And in that time, like, going back just a little bit, my perspective, or I should say my struggles, was I was burnt out majorly, and I was really struggling with intrusive thoughts. I would constantly have visions of how I was going to find him, like that he wasn't well enough, and he'd have a moment of lapse, like in judgment, and that he would follow through. Like, those thoughts were very, very intrusive. His plan was to hang himself in the attic, and so I'd walk past the attic, which was in our closet. One of the attic entrances was in our closet, so I'd walk in our closet, and immediately, like, my heart would race, and, like, if there was any, like, insulation or dust around it, I would be like, where is he? Or in our garage was another access to the attic, and it was stairs, and so if that was left down, immediately my heart would start to race, and I would feel panicky, like, where is he? That went on for quite some time, and if he left the house, like, by himself, he would text me when he got somewhere and when he was coming back, just as a reassurance to me. And I understand how that could have felt like a burden to him, but he, like I said, committed to doing what he needed to do to heal and earn back my trust. So probably after about 4 to 5 months after he had told me he was suicidal, he was at a place where he was a little bit more stable, where he was more consistently reaching out to his tribe, like his guys that he went through Save a Warrior with, or his buddies from the army, or his mentor, or just people who were positive in his life. He was reaching out to them, and I could say to him when I saw him struggling, hey, I think you need to reach out. Like, it wasn't just on me anymore. And I needed him to have that community as much as he needed himself to have that community. In that we were realizing just how important having a community in healing is. Like, you can't do it alone. You can't do life alone. And you can't heal alone. Like, you need people who can support you, and you need people who can challenge you, and you need people to listen and just be there. Him having that really lifted that burden off my shoulders some. Like, it wasn't just me anymore. And in that, I also realized that what I was putting on myself was that I was trying to heal him. Like, I felt like it was my responsibility to keep him safe. It was my responsibility that he wouldn't follow through. It was my responsibility that he was happy. And no wonder I felt such a burden. That's an impossible task. And it really took me a long time to accept that. I still have moments of working on accepting that, because I wanted to fight and do anything possible to keep him safe and well. But ultimately, he was the one that had to commit. He had to commit to healing. He had to commit to working on himself and growing and being in relationship with people and not pushing people away and trusting himself and people and finding out who he was. So that process was happening for months. And finally he looked at me and he said, okay, I'm stable enough. Like, I'm doing okay enough. I can keep the girls by myself for a couple hours and I'll be okay. So it's your turn. You need to go to therapy. And I agreed. It's kind of interesting having the roles reversed, whereas like for 6 years of our marriage, I was always his support. I was his caregiver. I was all of that to him, giving him myself. And then finally it was time for me to work on me. And that was really scary. But it was really also great to be put in that position, because I started to understand some of what he went through in healing. I also had a great therapist at the VA at that time, and she really helped me see how burnt out I was, and she helped me see how much I needed to take care of myself so I could be there for other people and be there for myself. And Eric working on him and me working on me allowed us to work on our relationship. And it really, it was a difficult and a challenging path. It made us grow. It made us see each other, I think, in a different way. And I'm very thankful for that. I think it set us up to be able to better support other people going through what we had and have, or what we have and are going through. As we've walked this path and been open to healing and been open to mentors speaking into our lives, things have just almost kind of felt like they've fallen into place in the last few years. Last year, about a year ago, Eric got an email from Iron Man. It was saying they were having their first season of the show Quest for Kona, and they were looking for athletes to audition for the show. And Eric's like, I'm going to do it. And I was like, okay, like, that's cool, Not that I didn't believe in him, but it was just, I have my own struggle with limiting beliefs, and that, like, why would we be on a show was kind of one of my thoughts. But I trusted him, and he was just open and honest in his audition, and he ended up getting picked for the show, which, man, the Quest for Kona experience was so good for our family. During that time, like, I was very much in my own healing journey, so I was really struggling with anxiety and depression a lot. But I needed that piece of hope that it brought. And one of the best things I felt like it brought was community. Again, community, I think Eric and I will say it a lot, is it's such an important part of this journey. Quest for Kona was impactful to me because the producer, Eben, was amazing. I interviewed with him for the show, and he wanted to hear our story. Like, he genuinely cared about hearing me, and I needed that. Like, I needed to be heard, and I needed to have that community, and really realizing, even though I was in a really rough place with depression and anxiety in that time, like, that gave me hope. And one of the reasons I believe so much in this partnership between In Country and Project Echelon is because it's all based around having a community and having support. It's giving veterans a place to go where they can focus on their healing, where they can share with people who understand, who have been in it, people who also want to hear them, and they can reach out when they're struggling and say, hey, oh my goodness, like, this is what happened today, or this is where I'm at. And let someone hear them and let someone speak into their life who understands the philosophy of sitting with your emotions and processing and what that all means. This is big. Like, this is needed. As a civilian marrying a veteran, I have spent years learning how to interact with my husband. I think that's marriage in general, but there's so much I don't understand about military because I haven't been in it. But the other piece of this is it's very important that we educate civilians about the struggles that our veterans are facing, and not to be afraid of them, and not to be afraid to communicate with them, and just be. Because to be accepted in the civilian world where they're entering back into after military life is also very important. And I feel like we can make an impact there. The goal would be that our veterans no longer feel invisible because of PTS. It's a very isolating struggle. And if they can be seen by the community and allow themselves to be seen, what a beautiful thing that would be. So beautiful. I think it will save lives. So with that, I'm in full support of this. I'm in full support of my husband pursuing this, and I'm all in too. I'm here. I'm committed to this. Partly because I feel like it's healing for me too to give back in ways, to give back with what I know and what we've experienced, and to use any skills I have that could be beneficial. But the other part of it is I see this as good for my husband. I see this as good for Eric. It's part of his healing, him talking with other veterans and hearing their stories and supporting them and being that support and creating that community that fills him. It gives him a sense of purpose and belonging and community, like I said earlier. It's invaluable. And so here we go. And I hope you guys will join us on this journey, because this is going to change our life, and I think it will change a lot of other people's lives as well. So thank you. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.